camp, and the Vikings obviously being, and the rest of the league obviously being impacted by the COVID tests and players now being put on this COVID list, blah, blah, blah. And players, it seems like, and probably wisely so, opting out of the 2020 season. My question, and I'll start with the Vikings, but this goes league wide as well. My question for you is this. How much do fans, media, and probably most importantly, teams themselves need to change their thinking for what their expectations were initially going to be going into 2020 versus now when some very key players are saying, you know what, I'll see you in 2021?
Everyone needs to change their expectations from the coaching staffs to the players themselves of, hitting these milestones and goals that they have for themselves for the season to us and realizing that our coverage needs to change and it's going to have to change because the access is changing.
Mhm.
It doesn't across the spectrum. Everyone needs to realize that this is not going to be a normal year. First off, that word normal gives me PTSD. So when I say, when people talk about, I can't wait till things go back to normal. No, it's, I can't wait until things go to the other side. We get to the other side of this. Got to pivot that way. And that's how we have to look at it in the NFL, in baseball, in sports across the spectrum. I'm not saying that this season needs to have an asterisk next to it. Whoever is the champion of the NFL season, if we even get to whatever the Super Bowl looks like, they will have fought their way to get there. Even if it is the Cincinnati Bengals who, have nothing, not even a puncher's chance right now. But if something happens where the rest of the league is just decimated by COVID and they get there, we know the circumstances of this year. You know what I mean? It's just like, I look at this whole thing and I realize that people's expectations, they're trying to make something normal out of something that is completely not normal. There's a reason this is a 100-year pandemic. It doesn't happen every year. So we're trying to figure this out. And I think it's hard for people because all throughout free agency and all to really, a couple weeks ago, the NFL had the luxury of time to work with here, realizing, let's see how other leagues do it. They'd be the guinea pig. We'll figure it out from there because we're the NFL. We're the biggest. We're the baddest. We have the most money, most fans, the whole thing. We'll figure it out when it gets to us. Well, now it's getting to them and they're kind of like, okay, so we're not any different than anybody else. Like, we are still dealing with this the way that they were,
And
but
it's not improving too.
and it's not. And it's
As a
probably not.
country, we're not improving.
It's probably not going to. And
Yeah.
so I think people are still holding on to the expectations of what the topics were a couple months ago. Tom Brady goes down to Tampa Bay. He's got Chris Godwin. He's got Mike Evans. Rob Gronkowski's there. They're starting to form a run game. They get, Tristan Wirfs. They got a great offensive line. That offense is going to be great. They're going to win the Super Bowl in their own home stadium. Okay, that's a fun topic to have. But let's move forward to reality. Yes, that still very well may happen, but we're going to be dealing with guys going in and out, in and out, in and out throughout the season. Right now, you're seeing the landscape of teams change drastically. I mean, the Patriots had 5 players alone that first day that the opt-outs were starting to come out.
Yep.
The entire look of their defense very well could have changed. And I mean, even with the Minnesota Vikings, with Michael Pierce opting out, a very big portion of their defense, granted, it's his first year. It was supposed to be his first year in Minnesota. Things are changing. Teams and the makeup of teams are changing, Judd. It seems by the day. And that's something that is just, that's the new normal, if you want to call it that. I'm actually a little bit more okay with that than people just saying normal. But it's the expectations, you got to temper them. This is unlike anything anybody has ever dealt with. And I know it stinks to kind of have to realize that sports may be very different and the games may look different and everything, the feel, but that's just the reality of the situation.
I love this topic because everything that you just outlined is rational and
I try.
people might not like it, but it's just the damn truth. Like, that's what you said is just the truth. Here's why I love this topic. Sports people, and I'm going to put National Football League people at the top of this list. They don't like change.
Mm-hmm.
They like to bully life, if that makes sense. Like, they plow through.
Make life bend to them.
They have zero patience. This is head coaches. This is GMs. This is, once the season starts, my wife, my kid, and my dogs go in their room, and I'm Mr. Football for the next X amount of months, okay? So to go back to what you just said, incredibly rational thoughts, as a person who covers guys like Spielman, Zimmer, the league as a whole, how does your thought process in your mind work with how they operate? Because this to me flies in the face of what football people believe, which is COVID-19, get out of my damn way. Do you know who I work for? The
Yep.
National Football League.
All right, I'm gonna pull up a
Go
tweet
ahead.
because you brought something up that I thought was a really good. I'm trying to look for it as I speak, but you brought up a good point with coaches and how people function in this society. And yesterday I believe it was on a conference call with reporters. The Steelers were. So Mike Tomlin spoke about everything that was going on in the kind of situation, and this is from Aditi, who works for, I'm not even going to try to pronounce her last name because I've tried before and I've botched it, but terrific
Oh,
report.
yep.
Aditi, terrific reporter for the NFL Network.
Mhm.
Some coaches are warm and fuzzy with the media. Mike Tomlin is not, which makes how he ended his call today, recognizing the challenges pay cuts were all faced and all things we're facing in this environment, all more meaningful. He said, I'm going to work my tail off to give you what I can. That is somebody who understands everything that needs to be said and understood this season. Coaches, they are creatures of habit. You have to be a little clinically insane to be a coach in the NFL, just given everything you're dealing with. And just the stress of this job is immense. Not the only ones going through it. We're going through it too. We have jobs too. People are getting laid off and furloughed from papers across the country. We are doing our damn best to cover the teams. And it's kind of like, you guys got to give a little, we got to give a little. And I think that that's the nature of, everybody, like which catchphrase, I saw something on Twitter a while ago, like which catchphrase annoys you more about COVID-19? Quote, we're all in this together, or quote, these unprecedented times, or whatever. And I think there's kind of a slew of those, just they become buzzwords. We're gonna, cringe kind of when we hear them going forward when we get to the other side of this. But the we're all in this together type thing doesn't just mean the team themselves. It's everybody that is a part of the NFL, including the media. And I know that teams are doing their best right now to try to make this thing better, try to make coverage and things and make their league sell. Coaches and GMs are going to have to bend a little bit, to help us out too, because it's not like, first off, we're not out to get anybody. I know that that's just such a tired, lazy narrative, but it will require everyone to make this thing work this year. I mean, I know that, I know certain scouts and certain teams aren't even in tier 2 and tier 2 or tier 1, obviously wouldn't be in tier 1, but they're having to work from home. They're not having any contact with coaches. So that's certain teams that I've, checked in with. That makes their job infinitely harder to make sure that the construct of each roster is where it needs to be. So I look at the situation and I look at, hey, everybody's trying their best. Temper expectations, but also be a human being about this whole thing and realize that you can't do things the old way that you used to do it. And I think nothing's going to be more pertinent than that, of seeing that in action, than on a Thursday or Friday when the injury report comes out before a big ass game and we see a star quarterback on the injury report with the COVID designation, or multiple players. Like, how do teams handle it? That is true crisis mode. That is true, adversity.
But you have to be prepared for that. Like you're right. That's going to happen.
It's absolutely going to happen. How you prepare for it, how you prepare your backups. I mean, this is going to change potentially how teams form their 53-man roster. Maybe you keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster this year. I mean, obviously you don't have to do that. You could always keep somebody on the practice squad at the running the risk of them getting poached by another team. But this is why the practice squads have expanded potentially to 16 this year, because there's going to be certain instances of this. I think that that's the good thing with the NFL. They're at least prepared in that standpoint to be like, no, like our healthiest, Tom Brady and his avocado diet, like, he's immune to this. He's not going to get it. We don't need to do anything like that. No, like they're preparing for everybody, not just your big old offensive linemen who may have pre-diabetes, or your defensive tackles that we're seeing a ton of them opt out of the league already because you're concerned about like their breathing issues. This can impact anybody. So be prepared for it and just try to, the whole next man up mentality. Sometimes some people like roll their eyes at that. That is the case this year in everything from coaching.
Cliches are now true, Courtney.
Yes. One day at a time is literally how I lived my entire life during
quarantine. Which, by the way, I hate.
I hate it too, but
ordinarily that's a BS way that's garbage. But yeah, cliches in 2020, cliches actually apply to our lives in sports and
more than
in
ever.
non-sports.
Like, I'm on to Cincinnati is something I use to literally get myself through, like, wow, today really sucks because we're seeing these numbers pop up and everything else. And man, I'm really stressed about my job.
Yeah.
On to Cincinnati. You have to move forward to the next thing. And I think that with NFL teams, we're seeing kind of society and like it's like a microcosm of society. And they always try to, operate like that. Like, well, if locker rooms, if society could more model a locker room, we'd be in good shape. I hear that. I kind of roll my eyes at that sometimes. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. But
Sure.
we can learn a lot, I think, from sports and just the way that you have to pivot and pivot quickly. The decision makers are going to be judged no this is going to be the one year that their way that they try to handle this in crisis communication format,
Mhm.
that's what they're going to be remembered for. The ones who did it the right way and the ones who just waited till the last minute and chose not to accept the reality of the situation.
On the Vikings off that point then. And every team is going to publicly say, well, yeah, it's tough, but to your point, next man up, blah, blah, blah,
Mhm.
right? Um, do you think, or have you heard rumblings that internally in Egan, that the Vikings are going to have to adjust expectations because they're going to, when they do take the field eventually, assuming that they do, Courtney Cronin, Pierce is gone now. So
Yep.
the interior of your D line is massively changed in a bad way.
Yeah.
You still have, and of course, this is not COVID related, but you still have self-induced. You're trying to work not one, not two, but three new corners in. I gotta believe internally, if I'm Zim and I sit down with the Wilfs and Spielman now with my new contract, that I'm going to say, boys, I'm not going to talk about this in press conferences, but
Mhm.
but internally, be very aware here that my pride and joy in life is what? A big nose tackle
Yeah.
and corners, and I don't know what I'm going to get there. I just got to think that teams are going to rearrange their expectations and just not tell us that.
Of course, I think you have to if you're a realistic person. It's usually you always hear kind of like they'll go back and talk about the expectations in hindsight and all the things that may have hurt them in a given season. They'll never talk about it during. And that's a coaching tactic. That's keep your team locked in, make people still believe. Like I get it. I mean, Mike Zimmer could have talked about that during when he lost Teddy, when he loses Sam Bradford, and be like, well, yeah, like expect things to suck for a little bit. But he never did. I mean, and you'll hear people talk about it in hindsight of, well, look at all the things that happened. Of course, XYZ was the outcome. But,
Mhm.
This year, and I remember asking him on the conference call last week just about, you know, you got this 3-year deal. You fought for this 3-year deal. It's why the thing took so damn long to get settled. Instead of just accepting another 1-year contract extension, and then, you could, as he said, he's like, at my age, the length of it was very important because he's going to be
Yes.
64 this year. So let's say it goes into this, he gets another one, and then he gets fired or something. Then he's 66, and he admitted it'd be hard to get a head coaching job, and rightfully so. But then it's like I followed up with him and asked, well, do you kind of feel like you have the luxury of time in a bit to make this thing work, to see your vision through? You've got to make this year player development year. And he's like, well, Courtney, I'm not the most patient person. Yes, we know that. And that's fine. You want to keep your foot on the gas? Absolutely. Dude, I mean, why would you concede right now? Like, this is going to be a development year. Like,
Right.
that's smart. I absolutely get it. But like when you strip all that PR and all of the positive talk away, you're looking at a team that just went through a massive roster revamp with its defense. You have cornerbacks, which Mike has talked about, usually takes them about 3 years to truly get it in the NFL, but particularly in his defense. Mike Hughes may have
Mhm.
been the only exception to that, at least to my knowledge, because the way that Zim talked about Hughes as a rookie, I've never heard such glowing praise. And that was really impressive. And that made me think, had he not had the injuries, he'd be so much further along. But you have a brand new starting group of corners. Your defensive line is now playing musical chairs. You're going to have to kind of realize, even internally, like, do the best you can. But if you win this year, it's all gravy. But you're kind of, I mean, the way that the roster was built
Mhm.
through the draft, and really the things that they didn't do in free agency, but truly through the draft, it sets you up for the future. You're asking Justin Jefferson to be Stephon Diggs. That's not going to happen in year one. He's going to have to learn how to play,
Yeah.
receiver in the NFL. I mean, yes, he is the heir apparent and the replacement for Diggs, but you can't walk in here day one expecting Stephon Diggs to show up. That is just not what's going to happen. So, yeah, you're built for 2021 and beyond. The expectations, though, for 2020, outside expectations, because I know teams can do whatever they want. They can put their goal list in their lockers, players, that is, and coaches can
Right.
think whatever they want. But realistic expectations, anything you do in 2020, I mean, you made some all-in moves like extending Kirk Cousins when you didn't have to, but now you got him. You can extend Dalvin Cook if you want to, but for now you got him in 2020 if you don't. Um, if you win this year, it's gravy, but you are set up to win. You better win in 2021. That's when the expectations and the heat really comes on.
Last thing, give me a team that you think, in the current environment and circumstances, is the most prepared to thrive in COVID ball. And by that, I mean, do you see a team that's run by a good young coach? Like, I gotta think the old coaches ain't gonna do great here because they're gonna bristle and be chafed. But do you think that there is a team that you can identify that you say to
Mm,
yourself, you know what, I could see that guy taking this, and assuming that his roster's not decimated,
yeah.
being successful?
Honestly, no, because I think that it's still too early to tell how we're really going to react to this. We're not even at training camp yet. I mean, guys are
Right.
in that acclimation period, but even as of late this week, the Buffalo Bills sent their rookies home to do the virtual stuff because they realized this is, it's not working right now, guys. Everybody, there are a lot of, I think it was 5 players had tested positive. Um, I think that the teams you see making heads up moves like that, even when it's like, oh my goodness, like, what does this say about the league? Like, what does it say about like where things are? The ones who can get out ahead of it are going to be the ones who ultimately succeed. And the ones who can understand that their way of doing things before is not going to cut it by and large in 2020. And that doesn't necessarily mean, everything has to change, but your scheme may have to be altered because, especially what you're doing on defense, you might not have the same level of talent.
Yep.
Like, can you ask, like, Anthony Barr, for example, can you ask Eric Wilson to do what Anthony Barr does? Everything with it? No. Like,
Mhm.
you know, Eric Wilson's a terrific linebacker. He's probably the number 3 if they're ever in their base, but I mean, he can certainly fill in, and he has before. But, you know, you have to, this is an adjustment league. Coaches, I mean, are going to be working like probably twice as hard to come up with like secondary and tertiary plans for like what does my defense look like this week? Assuming this guy can't go, how am I going to have to adjust how we rush the passer in this sub package? How are we going to use more blitzes? I mean, it's kind of actually, it could be very cool to see what the adjustments are because coaches are always judged on how do you adjust, how do you work on the fly.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
There's no year
you're
to work
right.
on the fly better than this year.
Great stuff. Thanks, Courtney. Talk to you next week.
Thanks, Judd.